Thank you, sir.
Yeah, when you're ready.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston, we were going to go on to the cross sections. So if we can have...
So I have your dates, if that's helpful.
Oh, yes, that would be very helpful. Let me
Yes, I was initially appointed 23rd of November 2023 to undertake,
2023.
to undertake an initial appraisal, and that resulted in a letter to the council in November 2023. I was then on a watching brief for traffic and transport until the 14th of February 2025. And that was when I was instructed to prepare this information that you've got with you today and everything that's associated with it.
So just taking that up, you were instructed in 23rd November 23,
Yep.
but you didn't have an active involvement in the formulation of the scheme by Mr. Lee in September 2024. That's
correct.
The inbound central bus lane, because you thought that was unsafe. You then gave advice and it was changed to a near side.
Correct, that's right, lane. Yes.
So going to the cross sections, can we just start with, if we can, so we're in Mr. Lonergan's rebuttal appendices, and I'd like to start with, if I can find it, cross section C, which is on page 38. Now, Mr. Johnson, you said that in general the road was straight and flat, but here, and that was general, you weren't saying it was absolutely straight or absolutely flat, not suggesting otherwise, but here we have got a bend, and if we want just to check on the location for that, if you go back in those appendices to page 30, we can see where cross section CC is, just to remind ourselves. So we have a bend in the road there, don't we? And one or a number of the departures identified by Mr. Lonergan are based on the absence of widening of lanes at the curve, aren't they?
Yes, that's correct. So yeah.
Yeah, and those are accepted departures.
Unless we engineered them out at the end of the day.
But they're not engineered out at the moment.
Not at this point in time, no.
And if one takes section CC, if you've got, and the reason that being on a bend matters is because if you've got a larger vehicle, as it takes the bend, it tends to take up more space because it doesn't stick to its lane precisely or to its trajectory.
Yes.
And we also have there if you look at CC, if you're going to move the road to the south, because that's on the outside of the bend, you'd have to build up the road on that side, would you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, one of the solutions you had to building up the road was to level it off, because you were going to completely reconstruct the road. Now, if one was to level off at that point, you'd either have to go, it's rather basic, down on the right or up on the left, wouldn't you?
Sorry, sir, you've misunderstood me. I meant lower the level of the whole road.
Yes.
So you would take it down on the left-hand side, and you would reduce the verge on the width on the right-hand side where the tree is.
Yes, but you would lower the whole, because you've got to have it on a bend. You probably slightly elevated on the outside of the bend, isn't it?
You would be, because
you don't have a normal camber.
No, you've got super elevation.
You have a super elevation.
So if that was deliverable on that side, you would look to lower the road.
Yes, but if you lowered it, you have to lower the whole of the road.
You would have to, yes.
Lower part
yes,
of
correct,
it.
yes.
And that would mean that looking at the left, which I think is the northern side of that drawing, if you keep it level and you lower on one side, you have to lower on the other.
Yes.
So taking the left hand side of that drawing, which is next to Madingley Wood, what happens if you lower there? You have to dig away?
You would have to dig away, as I said earlier. So the normal option on those is to use hand dig. So you would hand dig round the roots and protect all the roots as you went.
Yes, but if you're lowering, even if you hand dig, it's not as though you've still got to lower, haven't you? So if there are roots sticking out on the upper surface, however hand dig you do the digging, you have to lower.
If you look at the cross section, sir, the red is above the green. If you look at it,
yes.
So you will be dropping the red by whatever distance you felt was appropriate on that side, by a certain distance, which would still be only marginally below what's there at the moment. The road carriageway would drop by the same amount, but you're building the verge up. If you look at that cross section, the verge is built up, the road isn't built up. The road is on that drawing coplanar as per the existing, which is some distance away from the actual wood, but you would do it by hand digging, and you would have advice and you would have experts on the line all the time to make sure that you didn't damage any of the trees, roots and things that were there.
But taking this as an example, that is something that hasn't been considered in any detail, has it?
Not at this stage, no.
No. So that is CC. Now, if one then goes on, and we're kind of going along the road, if we take if we can EE. We've got EE, it's on page 39.
Yes, I have that, sir.
Now this is obviously, goes without saying, based on your lane widths, which would involve a departure, and statement of the obvious, but if you had wider lane widths, it extends further either side. It's a matter of simple mathematics. But if we look on the left hand side of this drawing, now if you're to keep within the highway boundary using all your widths, you're going to have to build up the level of the shared cycle pedestrian path, aren't you?
To a degree, yes.
Yeah. Even if you change it so it's dipping in rather than dipping out, you have to build it up.
Yes.
And if you build it up, you then either have to have a slope to support it or some other kind of structure.
Yes.
And you need to have a space between the side of the cycle lane and any slope, because you don't want people veering off, do you?
Yes.
Yeah. And if you built it up there, you can see that the red line, 1 in 3 slope, not shown on CPPF plans, that would go through the yew hedge. So the alternative to that is what? A retaining wall?
Well, as I said earlier, so the first thing I do will be to lower the road. So that the road in its entirety will be lowered slightly, so that you start off with a lower point on the left-hand side. I would then slope the footway cycleway in the opposite direction, drain it at a lower level with poorer servicing. But by that time, you're into something around about the 300 mil mark, which we could deal with easily.
But if you lower the road there, at the moment, there's a grass bank which runs down the side of the road and goes to the yew hedge. What you do is you lower the top of the bank.
Yes.
So you then change the relationship with the hedge.
Yes.
By lowering the bank, you broaden the road, put tarmac on it.
Yes.
But you still have to support the edge of the road.
You do, but the third point I made earlier was the 1 in 3 slopes are based on materials that stand in 1 in 3. I'll have a significant amount of materials to stand at 1 in 1 if I choose that, because of the aggregates I'm getting out of the road. And 300 mil, I don't like waving bits of paper, that's a 305 mil piece of paper. So we're talking about the difference at the end of the road of that piece of paper, which is easy to deal with. We can
When you
easily
say it's easy to deal with, you have to support it, don't you?
Yes, but you can support it on a 1 in 1 slope quite happily.
But even if you have a 1 in 1 slope, that goes down towards the hedge.
Yes,
That's where it has to go.
Yes,
There's nowhere
yes.
else for it to go.
Yes, correct, yes.
And again, not assessed in any detail, not assessed at all in your drawings.
No.
And so, on all these drawings, there are important matters of detail which are yet to be determined.
Correct, yes.
And it's not known what the consequences of that detail would be on the verge, on the hedge, or otherwise, is it?
I'm happy that I can stay within the corridors that were defined for environmental mitigation for risk. I'm happy that I can engineer those schemes to sit within that format.
Well, you say that, but of course, if you lowered the road, you'd have to lower the verge, and you'd need your support at the side, which would go outside the existing boundary.
No, I don't accept that at all.
Well, you've got a U hedge,
Yes.
and then there's a slope that goes up from the U hedge to
Yes.
the current road.
Yes.
If you were to level the road, you reduce the height of the verge,
Yes.
and you have to support whatever you put in there.
Yes, which I can do easily within the space I've got.
Well, you haven't looked at it in any detail, have
I'm
you?
looking at the cross section, I know I can.
But where's the engineering drawing to show?
Well, the engineering drawings would come
Well,
subsequently.
there aren't any, are there?
They're not at this point in time.
And if we then turn to cross-section HH, if we can, which is the M11 overbridge. And can we start just by looking at your Appendix F? And if we go to your Appendix F on page 94,
can you give me the titles coming? I'm looking at the articles.
it's the last page in it, it's the proposed cross sections, sir, and it's section CC at the bottom.
Thank you.
Now section CC is the one that shows us the M11 overbridge.
Correct, yes.
And so the specifications here, 3 metre cycle footway, 3.05 metre bus lane, 3.1 metre through eastbound running lane, 2.8 metre running lane, that's a turn lane, westbound running lane 310, and a 1.5 metre space. Now those are all civilistics dimensions, aren't they?
There was the dimensions that came out of the original bridge report.
Yes, but that was the basis for your analysis. Because these are civilistics drawings, aren't
Yes, no, I didn't provide the cross sections for the bridge. They came out of the Arup.
Right.
Is it an Arup report? I think it is.
they? So where does this, on civilistics, it says proposed cross sections.
Yes.
So these are civilistics proposed cross sections.
That one came out of the original Arup report.
Well, it may do, but its title here is put in by you, your Appendix F,
as a civilistics drawing.
As a civilistics drawing.
Yes.
It doesn't say it may be, but it doesn't say we've used somebody else's drawing, does it?
No, but there is based on the original report for that bridge, which was not our report.
Yeah.
That was a.
But these the bus lanes and running lanes, those are the civilistics dimensions.
Correct. That's what civilistics have produced on that drawing.
Yes. So we got the civilistics dimensions, and if we go to Mr. Lonergan's rebuttal appendices, his cross-section HH on his page 40, he has reproduced the same dimensions. He's taken them from the civilistics drawing, hasn't he?
Yes.
So no doubting the accuracy of that, it's just taken from civilistics.
Yes.
And we now look back. So the design that you presented in Appendix F included that arrangement on the M11 overbridge.
It did, yes.
And if you go to your proof of evidence, page 15, 5.07, so the resulting design is presented in Appendix F, and it includes that arrangement for the M11 overbridge. You've just confirmed that. It's not intended to be prescriptive at this stage. It's there to demonstrate that an alternative approach based on an environment-first stance can deliver a perfectly acceptable solution and at a fraction of the cost of the sea-to-sea transport work sector order proposal. So you put forward the designs in Appendix F in your proof of evidence as a perfectly acceptable solution, didn't you?
In terms of the environmental impact, yes.
Well, no, based on an environment-first stance.
Correct, yes.
Can deliver.
Yes.
So it was the engineering drawings in Appendix F which you said can deliver a perfectly acceptable solution.
Except for that bridge, yes.
Well, where in your proof does it say except for that bridge?
Well, I say two things there. Firstly, that it's prescriptive at this stage. Secondly, it's there to demonstrate an alternative approach based on an environmental first stance can deliver a perfectly acceptable solution. That isn't based on environmental.
No.
I didn't have any input to the cross-section of the bridge.
Mr. Johnston, where in your proof do you say that the proposals for the M11 overbridge are not acceptable?
I say it in that sentence.
Where?
I say it in that sentence. Demonstrate that an alternative approach based on environmental first stance
can deliver a perfectly...
I'm only talking about the section that is impacting upon the environment.
No, Mr. Johnston, you are referring to Appendix F, where, in the exercise of your professional duty, do you point out, as you said in evidence in chief today, that the solution for the M11 overbridge is not acceptable? Please point me to where you clearly state that.
I don't state that. As I've just said,
you don't.
This is an environmental consideration of the sections that I can't deal with by other means.
It's not an environmental, it's based on an environment first stance.
Correct, that's right.
What you failed to do, Mr. Johnson, was to draw the inquiry's attention to the fact that the M11 overbridge solution was unacceptable, which is what you've told the inquiry.
But we've already had evidence at this inquiry to demonstrate that that bridge was based on one of 5 solutions that were produced by and for the appellant. We've had that evidence. I was here when that evidence was given.
Mr. Johnson, where in your evidence do you draw the inspector's attention to the fact that Appendix F does not provide an acceptable solution for the 11 overbridge?
I've done that today.
Where is it in your written evidence?
I say that it's represented by that paragraph.
It's not there, is it?
That's a difference of opinion.
Well, it isn't a difference of opinion.
It is on my
Point to me.
I've just advised you where I believe that is covered.
Are you being open with the inquiry?
I've been perfectly open with the inquiry. I said this morning that I did not believe the cross-section of the bridge shown on that drawing was acceptable.
No.
I didn't. I gave that information this morning, and it is one of 5 options that is contained in the ARUP's report.
I'm going to ask you again, where in your written proof of evidence do you say what you said this morning?
I will come back to the same paragraph again.
I think we understand the position of Mr. Johnston.
And so you now say expressly that the solution for the M11 overbridge is not acceptable. You said that in your evidence in chief.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah. And is there anything which has happened since you wrote your proof to cause you to come to that view?
It would have always been my view.
Right. And so the CPPF scheme was always promoted on the basis that without changes to the M11 overbridge, it is undeliverable.
It was Civilistics took one of the cross sections from the Arabs report, and that was the one that was used in their analysis. That's what they did.
Yeah. But the CPPF scheme, without changes to the M11 overbridge of the type that you referred to today, would not be deliverable, would it?
I wouldn't deliver it on that basis.
Well, and it's not deliverable because you do not consider that the proposal for those very narrow lanes on the M11 overbridge are acceptable, do you?
No, but others did, because it was put forward as an option within an Arabs report.
But you don't, because the lanes are too narrow to be safe. Is that right?
That would be my view, yes.
Yes, good. So that means that it's your view that without intervention in the form of an additional bridge of the type you've described, the CPPF scheme is not deliverable. That we can agree. We have to.
Others have taken a different view.
No, but your view.
My view would that be, yes.
Okay. And so we then have to look at how do you deliver the intervention at the M11 overbridge. And your solution is an, if I wrote it down correctly, an 8 metre wide. Is it an 8 metre wide bridge or an 8 metre wide carriageway that you're looking at?
It's an 8 metre wide bridge, sir. As I said this morning, if you are going to intervene and build a bridge, then nobody would thank you for not building the bridge wide enough to accommodate future traffic demands on the M11 bridge as it sits today. So I would always provide it with the footway, cycleway and the C2C bus link. That's how I would do it.
Just give me the other old dimension again. It was
4.5 for the bus route and 3 metres for the footway, cycleway with a half metre separation. That's the 8 metres. It could be delivered as just a footway, cycleway, which is 3 metres plus the verges on either side, the upstands that required. On that, similar to the section that's shown on the new bridge, the one we were looking at this morning. That's not the correct one. That's the one, yeah. This is 5B. So the proposal from Atkins, sorry, not Arabs, was to provide a footway, cycleway alongside. I was simply suggesting this morning that you might as well provide extra capacity over the existing bridge by not taking it away with a bus lane, by providing the bus lane on the bridge that you're going to build. It seems logical, because you might need that lane for future traffic use on the M11 junction, and that's what the point I was trying to make this morning.
And in terms of the scheme which has been assessed, that option 5B, so it is a footway, cycleway. It has a central pier, does it?
No.
No, but in their scheme.
It does in their scheme, yes.
So has a scheme of the type that you're suggesting been assessed? That's with no central pier, 8 metres wide.
I deliver these and do these all the time. It's a motorway, standard cross-section. I know I can sling a single-span bridge across that without any difficulty at all. And give you examples, but unfortunately I'm not allowed to wave bits of paper.
Well, let's go back to the question, shall we? Has an 8 metre wide bridge without a central pier been assessed by Atkins in this report? Question 1.
No, but it has by me.
And where is your analysis which supports that? Where do we see that?
I do not need analysis to know on a standard motorway I can sling a single span across there, or whatever which I choose. I would invite you to look at M42 junction 4 if you want an example. There's one there.
And where in your proof of evidence do I find that?
You don't, but you've asked me the question, sir. I'm answering the question as to whether Atkins have assessed it. I don't need Atkins to assess the fact that I don't need a pier on a single carriageway, on a conventional carriageway motorway.
So Atkins haven't assessed it, you haven't assessed it in your proof, but you've given oral evidence on it.
Well, the worst that can
Well, is
happen,
that correct?
yes, the worst that can happen to me is I build a pier in the middle of the M11. That's the worst that can happen to me.
And have you considered, or have CPPF considered, whether any compulsory purchase order would be required to obtain the land?
We haven't, no.
And have you considered where you then go once you've built the bridge, how you approach it on both sides?
No.
And have you consulted, and we know that Atkins hadn't, have you consulted with National Highways on this?
I don't need to consult National Highways because I consult with them on other motorway schemes on a day-to-day basis.
But you have you consulted
No.
National Highways on this? No. So, can we now just look at the departure from standards? Now, if you go to your proof of evidence at 5.08 and 5.09, and when you wrote this evidence, you said, you referred to your Appendix G, 8 departures identified, and then you expressed your professional view at 5.10.
Yes.
Now, if you go to your Appendix G, do any of those departures that were considered relate to lane widths, and that's not including, that's vehicle lane widths, not the cycle footway?
No.
So when you came to your conclusion that we just looked at in 5.10, you were not considering departures based on lane widths?
No, that's
because they're not included in Appendix
not
G?
correct. No, that's not correct, because I would have already known, given the instruction to civilistics came from me, to reduce the width of the lanes and the necessary verge widths and hard strip removals. That I've already been known about. The fact that they're not listed by civilistics is simply a technicality by virtue of the fact I would have already known those, and they know I already known them because I instructed them.
What do you mean it's a technicality? Civilistics here are producing a list of departures, and the lane width is an important departure that needs to be addressed.
It is the most important departures, but they were listing departures that I didn't already know about. I knew I was going to have to apply for those. It was fundamental to the start of the scheme. Therefore, my sentence here, which says, in my professional view, none of the departures identified prevent CPPF alternative from coming forward, is correct.
But where is the lane width departure identified?
It is known departures. It's an absolute known departure from start.
Let's have a look at what you actually wrote. You wrote, none of the departures, with a capital D,
Yes.
identified, would prevent the CPPF alternative from coming forward. Where is the lane width departure?
It's not on that sheet, but I don't think anybody in this room is under any misapprehension as to the fact that that is a departure, and it's one that was promoted by me.
But where in your proof do you
It
draw attention to it?
It doesn't need to be.
When you say it doesn't need to be, you wrote a professional expert report.
Yes.
You signed it off as an expert.
Yes.
And people can't be left to guess at which departures were included, can they?
I've written in my professional view that departures, CPPF alternative coming forward at this early stage of design. I'm happy with that. You yourself have raised the fact that the lane widths are departures. We know they're departures.
Well, but somebody reading your report wouldn't know that.
Well, I've made sure I've clarified that today.
Do you regret you didn't put it in your report?
No, of course I don't regret.
So you don't regret that your report was incomplete?
It is complete.
Where is the reference to the lane widths?
Well, it was done on a different basis.
So let's just have a look at where we are on this. The design that Civilistics have come up at your instruction and which you endorse is a constraints first design. You start with the constraints and design within the constraints. Is that right?
That's correct.
As a consequence, you end up with narrow lane widths, which would require a departure, and no hard strip.
Correct.
And the local highway authority would have to sign off those departures for this scheme to be deliverable.
Yes.
And there's no indication, and when considering whether to authorise a departure, they would have regard to their policy.
Yes.
And there's no indication from them that such a departure or departures would be acceptable, is there?
That's right, but you have to put that in the context of, if this scheme were to progress and the C2 scheme was to fail, then they would be in a position of having to look at all options again properly in this instance, and therefore the schemes that involve departures would be looked at in a different light.
But we don't know, and you cannot say with any certainty that those departures would be authorised.
Of course, that's the situation I'm faced with on every scheme that I do. I make an assessment of whether I'm going to get departures or not, which departures I'm likely to get, and I progress the schemes on that basis until a point in time that we apply for them formally.
And in addition, when you get to the M11 overbridge, in order to provide a safe and sufficient route, you need to build a new bridge over the M11.
You need to provide extra width, yes.
Yes, and you do that by building a new bridge.
That's how I would do it, yes.
Well, but you haven't provided a design, and you haven't assessed the prospects of that being approved, allowed by National Highways, or a compulsory purchase order being approved.
I don't accept that I need any material improvement from the National Highways to put a bridge over their network. I've got 4 bridges at the moment with National Highways over their network. They will ask me for the details. How are you going to erect it? What it's going to look like? How are you going to maintain it? What's it carrying? Where does it go? What's your headroom? They'll ask me all those questions, but they're not in the business of stopping me from building a bridge over their motorway.
But they're going to have to approve it, aren't they?
Of course they will, yes.
Thank you. So that's the CPPF scheme. Just give me a moment. Can we just go back to the Rectory Farm Bridge report, which is core document 936, just before we leave this topic, and we'll go to page 16, please. And I think we're going to have agreement here, which would be a happy coincidence. But we had, you made the point that Civilistics took their drawing from Atkins.
They did.
And that was option 2, wasn't it?
I believe so, yes.
If you look at the conclusion at 13, for option 2, cost and disruption during construction, moderate, something about statutory undertakers. And it says the key drawback of this option is that it can lead to higher risk of accidents and greater congestion due to narrow lanes, something that you absolutely agree with.
Yes.
But not only do you agree with it, Atkins said that, so CPPF and Civilistics, when putting it forward, must have known that it was Atkins' view, didn't they?
I would guess so, yes.
Yeah. So everybody is saying higher risk, unsafe, and yet it did form part of the CPPF Appendix F.
It did, yes.
And on your basis of your advice, and indeed Atkins' advice, it's not appropriate to put it forward because it's unsafe.
Yes.
Thank you. So let's then leave the CPPF alternative. I'm just going to have a little time on modelling, but not very much. East-west rail. So on traffic modelling, the complaint that you make in your proof, and I don't use complaint in a pejorative way, but the point you take is that the sub-regional model, and in particular the F-series modelling, was a 2019 update, and so it didn't take into account the effects of lockdown in response to the COVID pandemic.
Correct.
That's the short point. And the concern is about predicted bus passenger numbers.
Amongst other things, yes.
We've got that at 2.01. So the concern goes to the information used to develop the business case. It's not a concern relating to traffic impact analysis, because if there are fewer vehicles on the road, it means you will have overestimated rather than underestimated impacts, as you pointed out on one of your own schemes.
That's correct, but that's not the sole point of my point, if you like. My concern is that if you use the information simply to support a business case, you are not in the real world. You are not taking into account the fact that nobody may be on it, and therefore you are delivering a scheme basically to discharge a planning condition for the airfield. That was my fundamental point, because you've not proven that anybody will actually go on the bus.
And the other examples that you give from 210 to 223,
Yep.
how many of those relate to Treasury Green Book business analysis, and how many to traffic impacts?
The East Midlands Freeport will.
So there what?
The East Midlands Freeport, Gateway Freeport, is
That's a
definitely...
business case.
It will be a business case, yes.
Is it yet?
Not at this point in time, no, but it will be. Fareham isn't, and the Bloor sites clearly aren't.
No.
The Joint Warwickshire local plan, I don't know at this point in time.
No, but that's for a local plan analysis,
Correct,
isn't it?
yes.
So in fact, none of them are currently for business case purposes.
No, Junction 10A does, as I said earlier. I could have used that example, but I didn't.
Yeah. But just of the examples you've given, none are for business case purposes. Is that right?
No, the East Midlands Freeport is part of a business case analysis.
So there hasn't been a business case analysis
It's
yet.
been put together, and it will be put together. Yes, I'm not sure.
There has not been a business case analysis as yet.
It's underway.
Yeah, so it hasn't been completed.
Oh, correct, yes.
Thank you. And if one, just high-level principles now, the approach to business case analysis. The business case process provides the basis for public sector investment decisions, not decisions on whether to make a Transport and Works Act order. Is that right?
It's a combination of both, yes.
But the purpose of the business case is to secure public sector investment.
It is, yes.
That's what it's for.
Yes.
That's why the HM Treasury Green Book
Yes.
covers it. Thank you. It is not designed on its own to be the basis for decisions on whether to authorise compulsory acquisition of land. It's not sufficient just to look at the business case, is it?
No, it isn't. That's right, which is why I cite the fact that the modelling should have been updated to include the analysis to demonstrate the traffic benefits of the scheme as opposed to the economic benefits. I used Mr. Whitehouse's own words that the business case wasn't dependent upon any people travelling on the bus, but you haven't proven that any people will travel on the bus.
And the economic case is one of the 5 elements of the business case.
It is, yes.
And even then, the value for money framework is not limited to monetised benefit cost ratios. It requires what's described as a holistic approach.
It does, yes.
And would you agree that the business case analysis is not a substitute for the overall planning balance?
It isn't. And this is where I come back to exactly the same point every time. None of the modelling work that's produced today allow you to make that holistic decision. You don't have the information, we don't have the information in front of us in an inquiry to tell us how many people are going to get on the bus. It could be nil, as I said this morning.
Now, can we go to your 6.07? And the first line of 6.07, you say, while these assertions may be correct. Now, are you there referring to the part in red in 6.06 above?
I'll just have to read that if I may.
Yes.
I was referring to the fact that as stated in the previous response, the F-Series modelling was carried out in 2022, which was too early to carry out post-pandemic surveys and or update the model. That's what I was referring to. These assertions may be correct. The use of 2019 data remains an unacceptable starting point.
You say that, but what it says is the F-Series baseline comes from a full present year revalidation using the 2019 data and is therefore tag compliant and provides an accurate base of which to pivot.
I go back to the same point again, sir. Just because it's tag compliant doesn't mean at the end of the day it's a valid prediction of what's going to happen. It isn't.
No, but you're not disputing that it's tag compliant, are you?
I'm not disputing that it's tag compliant, no. I will dispute that it's tag compliant in terms of how you then ultimately deal with the COVID-19 aspect of it.
Right, well let's now look at that point. Now, can we go to core document 821, please?
Yes.
And that is the uncertainty tag unit M4.
Correct.
Which you refer to. And can we start at page 50, please?
I can, but I'm going to refer back to page 49 in my response.
Okay, well, I look forward to that. But I'll ask a question and then you can answer. You don't know what I'm going to ask yet. So if you go to B3.1, and you'll see there, so it's under the heading proportionate accounting for COVID-19 in prior calibrated models. So the first question is this aspect of the guidance, or was this aspect of the guidance relevant for those preparing the business case?
Yes.
And then if you go on to B3.1 itself, the department recognises that in the near future the large majority of transport models used to provide evidence for schemes appraisals will be based on years prior to the pandemic. Rebasing of models takes time and resources. The proportionate update process in TAG allows judgments of proportionality to be made when considering to what extent models need to be updated relative to the scope of decisions required and the surrounding risks. And then it goes on about proportionate and transparent adjustments. Do you agree that that is a sensible approach?
Not when there's CPO required. CPO requires the highest standards to be achieved, and using a 2019 model is not a proportional update in my view. If you turn back to the previous page at B2.1, the second paragraph reads, analysts are advised to assess the validity of trip matrices developed where there are significant changes from when the matrix was developed and the present day. The model should be ideally rebased. All of the schemes I work on rebases, and in my view a proportional response does not include trying to do adjustments to a model when CPO is involved and where the main purpose of the model is to support public transport. If you were talking to me about car transport, as we said earlier, then I would accept that's a reasonable approximation.
So where in this guidance document does it make the qualifications that you insert in relation to compulsory purchase?
I read the word proportionate update process. I don't think that's been done. I don't think you can use a proportionate update process. It warns you about that on the previous page, about rebasing it, and I do not agree that what's been done is at all acceptable when you're trying to CPO somebody's land.
And going back to the question, where in this document is there a reference to compulsory purchase?
It's proportional accounting for COVID.
So could you answer the question, please?
I've just answered the question. I'm saying that a proportional update process when CPO involved would involve the highest possible standards, and that hasn't been applied.
Well, can I note that you've made no reference to anywhere in the document which refers to compulsory purchase?
I've just introduced that there. That's exactly what I've just said, sir.
So where do I find the words compulsory purchase?
Again, it's a proportional update. My view of proportional update when CPO is involved is that you have to achieve the highest possible standards.
Right, so that's your view?
Of course it's my view.
Yeah. And do you, if we then, and do you agree that the factors that you consider, you've put in one, compulsory purchase, but it would include how long it would take to update the model and whether there would be a material impact on the outcome of the business case. Those are also relevant factors, aren't they?
Not when you've had 3 years to do it.
Well,
the model post-COVID 2022 could have been rebased at that point in time. It takes about a year to redo this, as I've said earlier on. That's my experience of these things. And a proportional approach would have been to do it properly, in inverted commas, at that point in time.
But just in terms of principle, the scope of the decision required includes whether it makes a material difference to the outcome, doesn't it?
It does, but as I continue to repeat, just because the business case is supported by the work you've done doesn't mean anybody will actually get on the bus, and that's the bit of information that we needed. That's the bit of information that should have been supplied to this inquiry with a rebase model telling us how effective that bus is.
And in terms of delay, you give an estimate of a year. Mr. Whitehouse gave 18 months after the data was collected, but you first have to collect the data, and once you've collected the data you then have to build the model.
Yes, it's a rebasing, so you would do the surveys and commission the modelling at the same time. Take you about a year.
Is that for a sub-regional model?
That's for an updating of a model that is like the CSCF, whatever it is, I can't remember the name.
But that's a sub-regional model,
yes.
isn't it?
No, this is the base updating of this model.
Yes.
You would only be interested in updating those components and rebasing those components of the area you're interested in.
But you have to do it wide enough to take
You do have to do it
the
wide
facts,
enough,
don't you?
yes.
And if one then looks at what has been done, so if we go to core document 932, and we go to paragraph 19 on page 5,
Yes, have that.
And then you'll go to paragraph 20. Do you agree that the WSP, in carrying out this work, were referring to the correct guidance when they referred to tag unit M4?
Correct guidance, yes, yes.
They took the right approach, didn't they?
Yes. My comment on that, which is what I've written here, is the third example, namely applying a post-COVID model adjustment, was considered the only appropriate one in this case, as all the modelling had already been completed and there were no alternative models available. But that was a 3-year period. That was over a 3-year period, so there would have been plenty of time within that period to do the whole thing properly. And this is a bus-based scheme. It's vital that we know how many people are going to travel on the bus.
But it's a bus-based scheme.
Yes.
But the major contributor to the benefits, when you're working out the benefit cost ratio, is the land value uplift.
This is the point.
Well, can you just agree that?
Yeah, in this instance it is, yes, which automatically brings with it a warning. If you are basing a scheme purely on land value uplift, you do not know if anybody's ever going to use it. There's no evidence there to suggest that anybody's going to get on that bus. And it's the example I did this morning, where if you start off with nobody wanting to use the bus, then this is a completely worthless exercise.
But what you did this morning was refer to changes in demand for buses and the like,
yes,
in other schemes that you're involved in.
Yes, that's all I can do, because there's been no evidence presented to this inquiry that the bus that you are promoting is going to take anybody at all.
You say that's all that you can do, but you've carried out no analysis of the changes in bus patronage in this area, have you?
That's your job. That's
Well,
not,
but I'm
that's not
asking
my
you.
job, sir.
Have you done it?
No, I haven't. But you haven't either.
Well, let's just have a look. You suggested when you gave evidence that demand is falling, and the inspector specifically asked you, how do you know when a steady state has been reached? Do you remember that?
I do, sir, yes.
And when you gave that answer, did you consider any figures relating to bus patronage in the Cambridge area?
No.
And can I ask you whether you considered the figures which are available, which we have before the inquiry, in core document 2909? The answer must be no, because you've just given me the answer.
Correct. You've missed the point again, sir. The point is, it's not existing bus patronage that's important. This is a new scheme, and it's going to take people off the road, either via park and ride or from the housing developments that depend upon it. If there's nobody there from those developments to go on that bus, then existing patronage is not where you should be looking. You should be doing the modelling, and you should be determining what a new route that's serving lots of development, let me finish please, that's serving lots of developments, what it's actually going to do.
If one's going back to the inspector's question, has a steady state been reached? Can we go to core document 2909 and go to page 5? And we got recovery tracker, has transport use returned to pre-COVID levels? And if one looks at bus passengers, before we look at park and ride, you can see that during the lockdowns, minus 86, minus 77, minus 80, and as you go over the years, when in the latest figures, June 2025,
What page are you on?
sorry, on page 5, sir, should be a table which is headed recovery tracker.
Got it.
And we're now, for bus passengers, at minus 7.
Correct.
And for park and ride, it's up.
Correct. Both of which are, again, you've missed the point, sir. The point is that if existing bus patronage is down, which is clearly showing that. It's reached a stable point at this point in time, which is 7% below the original figure. But you've missed the point. It's not the number of people that are travelling on buses or using park and ride. It's the number of people that are left. If those people have come back onto the bus or new people have moved on to fill up the gaps, it's the fact that there isn't any people left that are going to go on a new bus service. That's what I'm finding, simply because the total number of people that travel has gone down. So they're working from home, they're doing all sorts of things. So without the modelling, as I keep reiterating, you cannot use that sort of data to support a case for the bus. You can't.
But when you are considering whether a steady state has been reached, this is the date, some of the data you should look at, is it not?
It's a steady state probably has been reached. I would have argued the steady state was probably reached 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, go to page 8, and we got specific information about guided busways and bus passengers, and that is on a, if you look at the graph,
Yes.
is on an increase, isn't it?
It might be on an increase.
Well, just look at it. Is it on an increase?
Yes, but you.
So your answer on steady state was not based on local information, and when you do look at the local information, we have a steady increase in guided bus passengers.
I misunderstand your point, sir, or you misunderstand mine. A steady state is a point when you can ignore COVID and do some new surveys. That was reached in 2022 at the worst of 2023. That's what's accepted nationally. So those surveys should have been done properly at that point in time to inform this inquiry as to how many people were likely to travel on your new bus service. That wasn't done.
And so going back to your point, well, everybody who's already wants to travel on the bus is travelling on the bus.
Yes.
Is your point. But of course, if you introduce new development at Bourne Airfield or at Cambourne West, you introduce a large number of additional people who are going to resort to modes of travel.
Absolutely, this is exactly my point, that we need to know, before we go down the route of CPOing people's land, how many of those new people are going to travel on the bus. That should have been done. This should have been properly modelled, and we should have a discussion today about whether it's 10,000, 20,000 or 15,000, whatever the figure is per day from those developments. That's where your catchment is. That hasn't been done.
But you say that hasn't been done.
It hasn't.
But that, what you don't say is there's been if we come down to the nub of it, you take a different view of what was a proportionate response. And that is a matter of judgment, isn't it?
I absolutely take a different view, yes.
And that's the difference between us.
It is, but it's a matter of judgment only for the benefit of the benefit-cost ratio. It should have been done simply to inform the number of passengers. That's what the whole scheme is about. It's not about justifying economics. It's about delivering a real solution to the problem that these travellers are going to face in the future.
And other than taking a different judgment on proportionality, you point to nowhere in the guidance which says that the applicant was required to commission or rebase the sub-regional model, do you?
I take its recommendations, as I said earlier. It said it should be done.
Yes, and that is, we're going back to core document 125.7, aren't we, on that?
We're going back to core document 8.21 at paragraph B.2.1, which says that model should ideally be rebased.
Yes, ideally, but it doesn't say they have.
There's no excuse for not rebasing it in this instance.
But an ideal, it then goes on to a proportionate response.
It does, which I disagree with.
Yeah. You disagree on whether the response was proportionate.
Correct.
That's what it comes down to.
It does.
Thank you. Let's turn to East-West Rail and your position on that. And we have your 3.02 in your proof of evidence.
Yes, sir.
And you say that The economic case addendum fails to mention East-West Rail at all. This is contrary to the advice set out in tag unit M4. And you then go to tag unit M4, which we've been looking at, core document 821. And let's just see what that document actually tells us in a moment. And I just want to identify one other point. You at 312 say, last sentence, given the findings in section 2 of my evidence, the already low basic benefit cost ratio of just 0.5, this collective omission is highly likely to render the scheme non-viable. So I'm going to examine those 2 points. First of all, was there a failure to comply with tag unit 4 and your reference to the 0.5 benefit cost ratio. So we start with East-West Rail. East-West Rail has 3 connection stages, I think they call it, starting from Oxford in the west, coming across to Cambridge. And the section from Bedford to Cambridge is stage 3. Is that right?
I'll take your word for it, yeah.
Well, that's what East-West Rail say anyway.
Yeah, okay, fine.
And as far as that stage is concerned, and just say that I'm not misleading anybody, let's just turn up core document 2309, which is East-West Rail's statement of case. So it's 23-09, and we can note at 2.2 the connection stages: connection 1 Oxford to Milton Keynes, connection 2 Oxford and Bedford, connection 3 Cambridge, via Bletchley and Bedford.
Correct, yes.
And if we then go to page 3 in that document, we can see that by the time we get to 3.1, on 14th November 2024, the Secretary of State gave safeguarding directions in respect to the land required for EWR. So if we got there as far as the safeguarding directions stage, it's not an approved development proposal, is it?
No.
And no application has yet been made for a development consent order or other consenting process.
Correct.
So we then go to the tag uncertainty unit. So we go back to 821 if we can, please. And we go to take up your proof and then we'll apply the tag unit. But at 3.06 in your proof, page 9, you describe EWR as a fully committed scheme, but they haven't yet applied for any consenting process, have
No,
they?
in small lettering, so that's what I
Sorry?
meant. In small lettering.
Small lettering,
Fully committed scheme. It's a scheme that the government intend to deliver.
but it hasn't. They haven't even applied for consent.
No, but
yet.
they're funding it.
So this is the June 2025 announcement.
Correct, yes.
And is that those words fully committed, are they used in the TAG guidance?
Unfortunately, they are, yes.
They are?
Yes.
Where?
It's the opposite, isn't it?
Sorry?
It defines the three schemes.
Yes. And so where is fully committed used?
I'm referring to the government's commitment to do it.
Right. Because if you go to the tag unit, go to page 18 please. And on page 18 there's a 5.1.2. First of all, so these alternative scenarios, which would include EWR, that, consistent with the rest of the advice, last sentence 5.1.2, analysis of alternative scenarios, it's got to be proportionate as well as sufficiently comprehensive, isn't it?
Yes, I think
so
that's
back to the old proportionate.
Back to proportionate. It should have been done. It has a material impact on the scheme. A sensitivity test would have taken 2 days to run if you'd had a proper model, and that should have been included in the analysis. And we should all be sitting here discussing whether it's 5%, 3% or 90% impact of East-West Rail.
And if you then go to classification of future impacts, which we'll find at page 51, table A2, and we just look at the categories, so what should be included in the core scenario, and you've got probability of the input, near certain, and then status, this is approved development proposals. Well, that's we haven't got to that stage, have we?
No.
And then more than likely, the outcome is likely to happen, but there is some uncertainty, and that is submission of planning or consent application imminent, development application within the consent process. Well, it's not within the consent process, whether it's imminent or not. Do you know?
Sorry?
Do you know whether it's imminent or not?
It's not imminent, no.
No. And even if it is in that category, it could form part of the core scenario. It doesn't have to, does it?
So I'm not suggesting it ever did form part of the core scenario. What I'm suggesting is that a sensitivity test should have been run on it.
Yeah. So you accept it should never have been part of the core
course,
scenario?
yes. But that's not what I was saying, not what I have said. I'm suggesting and saying that as part of a sensitivity test, it should have been run so that it can be quantified along with all the other things that are missing from the applicant's case.
But again, that comes down to your view of what's proportionate.
Well, it's the safe thing to do.
But it is your view of what's proportionate, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Oh. And so you said that the words fully committed were found in the tag unit. Were you actually thinking of those near certain and so on?
It was intending to refer to the government's position, sir.
To what?
The government's position on the scheme.
Yeah, but you then said it is referred to in tag.
Sorry, that was just a mismatch of the words.
So it's not referred to in tag, fully committed?
No, obviously isn't.
Thank you. And let's just have a look then at the second point, which is impact on the BCR. Now your starting point, where we were on 312, now you referred there, you used the words basic benefit cost.
This is the
ratio.
transport benefits.
Sorry? Yes.
The transport benefits is what I'm referring to.
So we have initial, adjusted and indicative.
Yes.
And by basic you meant which of those categories?
I mean the transport only without the land value uplifts.
Yeah.
So this is basically journey time savings.
So is this adjusted? Adjusted, the categories in the value for money framework are initial. You've told me that
It is. It's the initial.
It's the initial.
Yes.
why didn't you, if you're so familiar with all this, why didn't you use that
I
word?
tried to put it in language that would make it easily understood.
So, do you, and when you refer in 4.1, to about the fifth line down, whilst the number rises to anywhere upwards of 1.7, according to WSP, once esoteric count-ups of things like dependent development are included, the use of such and their quantification being taken up separately by Mr. Lee, the monetized benefits, and in particular journey time savings, continued to be derived from flawed pre-COVID modelling as discussed above. Now it's the word esoteric. So by esoteric, do you mean including land value uplift?
I mean including all the things that were not journey time savings.
Yeah.
Journey time savings are the ones that depend on people actually getting on the bus.
So other than initial or adjusted?
Yes.
But do you accept that assessment of indicative value for money is entirely consistent with the value for money framework?
Yes.
Oh. So why didn't you refer to it?
Again, I'm just writing it down in simple language. So.
But you're coming here saying that you do know about economic assessment. If you knew about economic assessment, you'd be using the terms used, wouldn't you?
Again, I'm just keeping things simple.
And East-West Rail, if you did a sensitivity, that doesn't affect the land value uplift, does it?
It doesn't, no.
So how can you say at 312 that the collective emission is highly likely to render the scheme non-viable when you haven't taken into account land value uplift?
As I said earlier, land value uplift is not dependent on people travelling on the bus. I like to see what the BCR of just the transport benefits of the scheme are, because if they're very low, as I said earlier, it means that you are putting basically a scheme into discharge of planning condition. That's the purpose of the scheme, without any guarantee that anybody's ever going to be on it. If the BCR value of the transport benefits is high, then you know from a starting point that lots of people are going to be travelling and saving lots of journey time. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, but if the value for money framework allows you to have indicative benefits, and it's been changed recently to have that metric, you would err if you did not follow that guidance, wouldn't you?
It's correct. I'm not disputing that the inclusion of land value uplift gives you a much higher positive benefit cost ratio than they do without it. I'm pointing out that you have to have a component that isn't nil. If you're relying wholly on land value uplift, all you're going to get at the end of the day is a discharge of a planning condition.
Well, you're getting more than that. You're allowing homes to be built and for people to live in those homes.
But that doesn't. There may be many other mechanisms like delivering the CPPF scheme. Yeah. As I tried to explain earlier, if your transport benefits are nil, then you are just discharging.
Well, you're not suggesting they're nil, are you?
But they might well be.
But you haven't put in any evidence.
No, but I'm going from my own experience elsewhere.
Yeah. But no evidence.
No, but you haven't put any evidence in to demonstrate that anybody is going to, not to demonstrate that anybody's going to use those buses. That's the piece of information that's vital that we don't have.
But taking the value for money framework, which we've got at core document 832, let's just take that up. So this is a May 2025 document. And if we go in that to 4.3.3, And this is on page 17.
Yeah.
Assessing value for money.
So I haven't got that yet.
Sorry, 4.3, page 17.
No, it's not there.
Should be core document 832. Have I got the wrong number? Should be value for money framework, May 2025. Page 17.
Is that PDF page 17, sir? Or?
They're the same. And it should have a heading 4.3, assessing value for money.
It is. It was off the top of the page.
Right.
Sorry for
Okay. And we've got types of impact and BCR metrics. And the department, 4.3.3, to reflect this in a way which is useful for decision making, the department distinguishes between 3 types of monetized impact: established, evolving and indicative.
Yes.
And these impacts are presented in 3 different metrics, and these are initial, adjusted and indicative.
Yes.
And it's entirely consistent with that guidance to present those 3 different metrics, isn't it?
Yes.
And if you go to the 3rd metric, that includes land value uplift.
It does,
and that
yes.
is entirely consistent
Yes,
with
it
the
is,
guidance,
yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you. Excuse me, just give me one. Yeah. So, just to conclude on that point, and you yourself have produced no sensitivity tests to demonstrate the effect of COVID-19 or East West Rail, have you?
No. Can I just raise, we did ask Cambridge County Council if we could do that, but ultimately would have been using the same model that is the flawed model that we started off with, so there was no point in doing that because you would end up with the same answers that were flawed in the first place. So we would have done that had there been a model available. We would have run those sensitivity tests.
But you didn't do it, so it
There was
comes
no
back to...
there was no model available for us to use. We weren't given access to even the F-series model at that point.
And on the, going back to the CPPF alternative, that is not designed, the starting point for that design is the environmental constraints.
Correct.
And if the departures are not granted, the scheme can't be delivered.
Correct.
And equally, if you can't or are not permitted to build a bridge over the M11, the scheme can't be delivered.
Correct. So what I will say is that when you're looking at departures, you always end up with mitigation. The mitigation is what makes the schemes acceptable. So you start off with a process of looking at them, proposing mitigation, and what you often find is that you end up with different mitigation or alternative mitigation in order to get the departures through. I've never had a departure rejected in 50 years. That doesn't mean I'm necessarily any better than anybody else at delivering them, but it means I do know how to mitigate and deliver mitigation. There's always a solution. If the county council are faced with the situation of this is the only scheme on the table, then between us, I'm sure we would come up with the mitigation necessary to deliver those departures. I think my mic's actually broken now,
Right.
is it?
Well, we nearly got to an end, but of course that is a judgment and will be a judgment for the Highway Authority, not for you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I've got no other questions for you.
The
Thank you.
battery's gone in my
Thank you.
microphone. Is there another mic? Thank you.
Yes, you'll probably need your microphone for just a little bit longer, Mr. Johnston. Yeah. We've probably got just a few more questions for you to answer. In your proof of evidence, on page 2, you set out at paragraph 107 the matters that you're covering in your evidence.
Yes.
That you're there to do. But if we then go forward in your proof to 2.26 on page 7, you've been talking about the model and your criticism of it,
Yes.
and you then go on to say there cannot be a compelling case in the public interest to justify the compulsory acquisition of land.
Yes.
Now, is that something that falls within the scope that you've identified of 1.07? Is that really a matter for you to address?
It's in my evidence, sir. So
I know you've written it.
I deemed it would be, because it's worth pointing out, and the whole point of it was that you can't support the case of CPO without a high standard of information. That information on the model.
But there are other things to take into account as well.
Of course there are. So yes, but that was my view at the time.
But that's outside. That seems to me to be outside the scope of Transport and Highway Matters.
Limitation of the traffic modelling deployed by CPC as results and the traffic benefits, I think that's where I included, and that's why I included it, sir.
And then going forward to page 10, in paragraph 314, you go even further there in 3.14 and suggest that this inquiry should be suspended.
Until that information was available. This is a fundamental consideration in
yes,
what's
but
here today.
That's not the view of the organisation you're representing, is it? Or it would have been put to the inquiry when the case was opened.
My evidence was scrutinised, and that was left in, sir. So.
But it's not been put before by CPPF or the parish council to the inquiry?
No.
So do I take it then that's a personal view?
Yes.
And again on page 12, paragraph 5013, you're there suggesting that perhaps the proposed system is not actually a guided busway. And you almost seem to be touching on a legal matter there.
Yes, it was just a point, sir. It's just a point.
Again, a personal view?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Earlier on today and in your evidence, you made some quite strong comments about public transport usage and almost the effect that since COVID, very few people are travelling that way.
Yes.
And questioning whether there would in fact be a need for the scheme at all.
Yes.
Would the same comments be applicable to the CPPF alternative?
Of course, exactly the same, sir. But the difference is that if you start from nothing and you end up with nothing, you might as well spend nothing. That was my point. And rather than spending 200+ million to achieve very little.
I understand the difference, but
yeah, it would affect all schemes exactly the same.
Yes, and in the same way that you question the need for the guided busway that's before this inquiry, are you also questioning whether there's a need for the alternative?
No, there's a need for a scheme. What I'm questioning is whether that scheme should be the minimum scheme or something in between, because the justification is people travelling on buses. If both schemes go down to nothing, you've got to know where you start. You've got to know whether any of those schemes are supporting themselves in the long term. They might well be economically viable because of the land value uplift, which is a planning condition on the airfield.
You're saying that information isn't there.
It isn't there, no.
And that criticism must apply to the alternative as well.
Of course it does, so yes, we did.
So it's not there for that?
No, it isn't. We did.
How can you argue in favour of that as an alternative?
I'm arguing in favour of it because it's a much cheaper scheme.
Simply, yeah.
It's the proving of how many people are going to use these schemes, and therefore how much money it is worth spending. The more you spend, the more people will travel on. There's no question about that, but it's proportional.
Thanks, Mr. Johnston. Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. Just going back, I think earlier on, I think it was possibly even during your evidence in chief, I think Mr. Clegg asked you about, what your statement about that there was a new normal and post-COVID travel patterns had been reached. And again, I think you said I might be incorrect here, you gave reference to, I think, the years 2022 and 2023 when you thought it had been reached?
Yes.
And but have you got any evidence that it is going to stay like that, or that it may change? How can you be so certain that
I monitor a lot of sites, both commercial and commercial and residential sites, and I'll look at the trends. Every report I do for a site every year has to list the trend. It doesn't only list whether 3% are using the bus or 5 or whatever the figure is. It has to list the trend, and the trend across all of the sites that I monitor haven't altered since 2023. The reports I wrote this week for Ed Walton, which is the site that's in my evidence, is exactly the same figure as it was in 23 and 24. And that's what I use the evidence on. So I know that the new normal has been reached across all of the sites that I survey and all the sites I look at, which is a very significant number.
But I mean, you talk about 23, 24. I mean, it's only 2025 now. How can you be certain that that is the new normal that's being set with such a limited time period?
I look at the time period I've got. I look at the evolution of each development. Some of these developments are quite significantly evolved over those periods of time. I look at the reasoning. I look at why people aren't travelling. Are they going to change why they travel? They're not, because they simply don't travel to the same degree as they ever did, and their lifestyles are different. Their lifestyles are much better in their views, and therefore they're not going to go back to commuting. A certain number of people are forced back in as companies say you've got to attend particular activities and things like that. But in general, it is a new world. It is a completely new world, and I am now planning public transport and different routes and things like that on developments that are different from what they were pre-COVID. And that's the fundamental point. If I'm taking into account a different scenario, then I think that the new normal has been reached, and I don't think it's ever going to go back to what it was.
So if I understand your answer correctly, you say you're basing that on the evidence you're getting from surveys?
Yes, that's right. Exactly that, sir. Yes, across numerous sites across the country that I survey for the house builders all the time, because I'm responsible for a lot of travel plan coordinator work. So I'm required to do annual submissions to the local authorities on about 30 sites currently, including Fareham, which is the tram link to Nottingham. And I'm currently sitting on tram link Nottingham at 3%. It was designed for 12%, and I'm currently sitting at 3% usage. I have, as a matter of public record, a £1,000 free tram vouchers to give out to the members of the site, people who live on the site. And I have 100 houses occupied, and of those 100 houses, maybe 200 people, I've given away 3. And that's the situation we live in today, completely different from the 12% that I designed it for back in 2016.
Talk about travel plans. There's been reference to proposed developments which have consent at West Cambourne and Bourne Airfield. Are you aware of any travel plan arrangements for those two sites?
Not that I've seen, so no. But the best way of encouraging people to travel is to give them free passes. And no matter where I go, it's extremely difficult to get people to travel on buses, and even with free travel. I've got a year's worth of pass at each individual resident can apply for me for a year's free travel on the tram, and I've given away 3, and that's a matter of public record.
And so, I mean, but my next question is what effect any sort of proactive travel plan measures might have on public transport use in this part of the world,
all of
in Cambourne and
all of the sites I monitor, I originally wrote the travel plans for. So I was aimed at getting as many people, and typically we're looking at a maximum of 60% single occupancy car usage on those sites. A travel plan will help, there's no question about that, but you can't enforce people to travel by a given means when they don't want to travel at all, and that's the point that's been missed here. You're better off giving them free broadband and telling them how to set up a business. This is what I spend a lot of my time doing on a lot of the sites, rather than travelling on a bus or a car. They simply don't want to travel. They want to be given the opportunity of taking their kids to school in the morning, on foot, walking back home, and then doing their day's work from wherever they are with the proper facilities there. And I get far more uptake of tell us how to do this, tell us what we can do, give us free broadband, than I do of bus passes.
And in terms of that experience you've had, is that to do more with very recent developments? Obviously, as far as I'm aware, Cambourne has been established for quite a few years now. Is there a difference in patterns between?
There is a difference in patterns. It's even more difficult to get new people to travel on bus than old people, is my experience. Not people by age, but people who've lived in their houses. You can generally get 5% of people to shift. If you can get up to about 5%, you're doing well. Beyond that, it becomes extremely expensive. People don't want to move. But today, they buy their house with a lockable frame, a lockable garage for their bicycles. They buy it because we've given them 2.2 gigabit hard broadband, and they know they can do anything from home. All of the people I know and deal with work from home from these places. And I knock on people's door and I say, well, why don't you travel? Well, we don't need to travel. We work from home. And the figures are there to demonstrate. And I've got multiple sites where not a single person travels by bus, even though I've got good bus services. And I've got multiple sites where car occupancy, car usage is in the 30%, which is akin to Cambridge, not because there's lots of people travelling by other means, because they're not travelling at all. And this is the sort of information that should have been before us, so that we could have a proper discussion. And if the thing worked out economically, and I'm proven to be wrong, I would absolutely have no problem with that. But that isn't the point. The point is that you can't compare a minimum scheme with a major scheme, spending all that money when there's no evidence that anybody's going to use it. And that gives us a major problem, of course, in terms of potential road congestion and things like that.
I think you made some reference in your statement to government data on light rail and trams. Now I'm conscious that's slightly different, but that, if I understood what you'd said, that was showing an increase in use, almost approaching pre-COVID levels.
Well, the one I obviously know.
Sorry, can I finish my
Yes,
question?
sorry. Yes.
I mean, would that not also apply to bus use?
There's a hierarchy. There's buses, there's guided buses, there's trams, and then there's rail. And that is the hierarchy that you go down. If you ask...
Sorry, when you say a hierarchy, what do you mean
the
by hierarchy?
The lowest standard is a bus, then it's a guided bus, then it's a tram, and then it's a train. So people switch to those means.
And sorry to interrupt you again, when you say a standard, are you talking about people's perceptions? Or
yes, exactly that. So yes, if I offered somebody a free train pass from the station to wherever going, they would take that up more than they would take up a tram, more than they would take up a guided bus. It's just the way people are. So I've forgotten your question now, so sorry.
Well, I was asking if that, I mean, the government data you referred to only, I think, referred to light rail and trams, but as I understood it, that was showing usage levels approaching pre-COVID levels. Bearing in mind what you were saying before about you saying there's a new normal, would that not apply to a guided bus route?
It would apply to a lesser extent. It's a less. I asked somebody on the doorstep, and this is anecdotal, obviously.
It's okay. I mean, I think. I probably don't know the anecdotal sort of evidence to support your response there,
I'll rephrase it. The problem that you'll find is that because it's gone back to COVID level doesn't mean that anybody new is going to go on it. There isn't the avail. If I build 1,000 houses, there isn't the market for travel that there used to be. It simply isn't there. So there's no point in saying, well, the tram down the road or the bus down the road is back to its pre-COVID level. It might be the same people that were travelling on it before COVID. Those people who are now in your new markets, the housing that this is supposed to release, are saying, I don't want to travel, I don't want to do this, I don't want to go into Cambridge at peak times, I don't need to. I've got the fastest broadband speed that I'm ever going to need, 2.5 gigabytes, whatever we fit them with.
I think that's, and just so I'm clear, I mean, you're basing that answer on your wider experience rather than anything particular.
Yes. I had no reason to believe this wouldn't behave exactly the same.
So you mentioned there was a hierarchy there of you called them standards, but also you did mention it's the perception. For something where there is actually new infrastructure involved, like the proposal, which will be a guided busway, is there not a sort of field of dreams type thing where you sort of build this
and they will come?
People will actually want to use it because it is a new piece of infrastructure.
They might initially. I would draw two things to your attention on that. Firstly, the end of it isn't guided. It goes into the centre of Cambridge the same as any other bus. And secondly, it uses buses. It doesn't use trams, air conditioned and everything else. And the perception of people on buses as they go on a bus in the middle of November with the windows condensed, that if you ask people who buy houses and ask them why they're not going on a bus, they say, why would I do that? It's not the same perception. I can't give tram tickets away. That's what I say at the moment. So
I mean, just one final thing. I think one of the things you stated was that the proposal would take buses away from the American cemetery, making it less accessible. I mean, would that actually be the case? I mean, as I understand it, the American cemetery does attract visitors. I mean, are you...
Sorry, sir. Can you give me the reference to that?
Let's have a look. Yeah, unfortunately, this is where my referencing system's gone a bit wrong. So, are you saying you didn't say that?
I don't remember saying that, sir. But if I did say that, I'd more than happy to explain it. But I don't remember saying it. That might be Mr. Lee's evidence, is it? I don't.
No. Well, I don't want to suggest that you've said something that you haven't. Just bear with me for a second. And again, if I have got that wrong, apologies.
Maybe that's what you were thinking of, just summarising the CPDF response rather than
it's possible I might have done that. Just bear with me for a second. And thank you for that.
Maybe a complete red herring, so it's so CPDF was now going to provide benefit to the cemetery by approving bus services to the cemetery. I don't know if that's what
Oh, that's not my wording, sir. I didn't think that.
I think if that's correct, yes. Apologies, I've obviously misread that. Yes, apologies. I think I think both you and Mr. Cameron are correct on that one. I've obviously looked at the wrong thing there. I think that's all the questions I had. Thank you.
Just want to check if there's anybody else who supports the scheme who has questions for Mr. Johnston. I don't think there is, but okay. So for examination time, Mr. Parker.
Thank you, sir. I'm conscious we have been going a while. I don't think I've got very much re-examination, but
yeah, it's probably this time. Normally with the time for break.
I reckon I've probably got 10 or 15 minutes at most. So I'm in your hands.
Well, that's all it is. Let's get it out of the way.
Yes, I'm grateful. So, Mr. Johnson, I've got one or two questions on the CPPF alternative and the engineering aspects, then some questions about transport modelling, and then some questions about EWR. In terms of the delivery of the CPPF scheme, you've given your view about the justification for the departures for the scheme that's been proposed, and you explained in detail how your scheme was designed. Environment first is the label you give it, but it's essentially within the constraints that are provided by the environmentalists, as you refer to them, so you avoid causing or impacting land outside the scope of the corridor. And it was put to you by Mr. Cameron that unless you were able to get Highway Authority approval for the departures, then the scheme was not deliverable. The CPPF alternative was not deliverable. And you gave your view about that. Now that's obviously the case for the drawings as shown in Appendix F, but let's say you go to the Highway Authority and you say, look, this is our scheme within the constraints. We're avoiding effects in these locations, environmental effects of various kinds, and we think that the scheme with these lane widths, with these speed limits, is acceptable. And the Highway Authority come back to you and say, well, actually, no. This particular lane width, we don't want 3.2 metres, we want 3.65 metres for these two particular lane widths. We're happy, for the sake of argument, with no verges, no hard strips, but we're insisting on 3.65 metres lane width. Is it right in that situation that the scheme from an engineering or safety point of view is undeliverable?
No, it would simply have an impact on the land either side. In most cases, accepting the changes in the highway boundary that we were looking at earlier, it isn't a physical barrier. There isn't a physical reason why you can't extend the road one way or the other. It's only an environmental reason. And in all of those instances, I did check with our environmentalists that it doesn't impact on the strategic importance, or what's the word, the actual statutory SSSI is not impacted on. It's 5 or 6 metres back from the road, so we're impacting on verges and things that have been colonised by trees and things like that within that area. You would simply say that we need 3.65, we will accept whatever impact there is there, and you have to then mitigate that impact as opposed to mitigating the horizontal curves of the road. But we're talking, again, I think it's important to stress that we're talking very small distances. The difference between 3.25 and 3.65 is only 400 mil, which is a little bit bigger than my piece of paper. In my experience, they might say the middle lane would have to be 3.5 instead of 3.25, which I've done elsewhere, which is which is that. And that isn't even the thickness of the line on the plan that we use to delineate between the bits that we could go into and not.
Thank you. Now I want to move on to some questions about COVID-19 and transport modelling. You are asked a number of questions by both inspectors about your view that we have, as it were, reached a new normal post-COVID. How do we know that things aren't changing as we speak? How do we know that things might not change in the future? And I just want to explore that a little bit more detail. Can you please take up CD 821, which is the tag uncertainty guidance? And if we look at paragraph B.1.1, so I've now lost my version, here we go, of the document. Now, for what it's worth, reading B.1.1, just remind yourself of what it says, particularly the second half of the paragraph. What is the government's view as to the position we find ourselves in terms of the effect of COVID on travel demand?
Well, it says it is the department's view and recommendation that this evident suppression of travel demand relative to pre-pandemic projection of demand at this time should be appropriately represented in transport analysis. This is important, particularly in analysis supporting transport investment. So they're saying basically you can take it into account. Now it is.
And let's assume I've heard your view, obvious, but very clearly that you think we've reached a new normal, and I've seen the data that you've referred to. But just let's assume for the moment that we remain in a situation at the current point in time where we've got 2 or 3 years post-COVID. It's a relatively short space of time. Things have changed, undoubtedly. But things might still be changing, and things might change in the future, and we're still in a period whereby there is some uncertainty as to what travel demand is and might look like in the future. On that hypothetical basis, what effect does that have on your position that there should have been post-COVID transport analysis as opposed to relying on transport analysis which had been produced in a pre-COVID world?
Well, I think we don't know what is going to happen in 20 years' time. We can only project, and all of us do that. We do know what happened as a result of COVID. We know that because we can go out and survey the information today. If you're asking me for a matter of conjecture as to whether that will ever go back to a pre-COVID, the world's different. It is never going to do that. It's just simply not ever going to happen. But what I'm getting at is that you can't start off from a point that's wrong and expect it to go right. You can start off from a point that's wrong and get an answer that demonstrates what you should be doing, and then use a matter of conjecture between everybody else as to what happens on that in the future. But the position starting point has to be what we know, and we know between 2022 2023 that all of the major sites that I'm involved with, and most others, are using pre-COVID models based on data that was collected over that period. And therefore that's what you should be using as your starting point. You should start off with the most accurate position you've got today.
Thank you. Now, just on the same page here, we've heard a lot about what is judgments about proportionality in reference made to the tag guidance in respect of proportionality. It was put to you that ultimately this came down to whether it was a question of you being right that one thing was required as being proportionate, or whether Mr. Whitehouse and or others on the part of the applicant who made decisions that this wouldn't have been proportionate. I just want to look at what the guidance actually says. If you look at paragraph B.2.2, please, we see the COVID-19 pandemic has led to marked changes in travel demand, even if there is uncertainty over long-term impacts. And we see then in transport modelling terms, the guidance in tag unit M2.2 applies. That is, this is an event of a significant change in trip patterns. And then this next sentence, to account for COVID-19 related changes, trip matrices based before the beginning of the pandemic should ideally be rebased. And then I want you, inverted commas, highlight and underline the next part of the sentence. Or if this is not possible, an appropriate adjustment applied to model inputs or outputs in a proportionate way. So the proportionality exercise only comes into play, reading the plain meaning of the guidance, if it is not possible to rebase trip matrices based before the pandemic. Anything in your judgment, anything that you've heard from Mr. Whitehouse, any evidence before the inquiry to demonstrate that it was not possible to rebase trip matrices from before the pandemic to produce a post-COVID transport model which you say was appropriate?
No, it's down to time and cost. There was plenty of time. We've had 3 years. Cost, I don't know, 100,000 or that sort of number to do the work as I've done elsewhere, and that would have given them the exact answers that they need as far as they possibly could have done today.
And so applying that understanding of the guidance, does proportionality, as it's referred to in that sentence, even come into it?
It shouldn't do, no.
Final set of questions then on East-West Rail. You were asked a series of questions and you explained that your position was that East-West Rail should have been modelled as an alternative scenario.
Yes.
And I just want to again look at what the guidance actually says about this. If you can please turn to page 9 of CD 821, we're looking at 2.2.12 and 2.2.13. We're in a section dealing with different types of uncertainty by way of context for your note and the inspectors, in a section under 2.2 being the uncertainty log. But just let's see what we understand by local uncertainty. Again, if you just read 2.2.12 and 2.2.13, Is there any doubt in your mind as to whether or not East-West Rail is likely to affect the traffic patronage revenues and delivery of scheme benefits? What effect it might have, let's leave aside. But is it likely to affect it?
It is bound to, otherwise it wouldn't be being built. That would be my premise on it. As I said earlier, it completely reshapes traffic movements into and out of Cambridge, Bedford, Oxford, places like that, where people might otherwise choose not to work in Cambridge, or they might choose to drive in by car. It's not just the corridor, and therefore you need to make sure that you analyse as a sensitivity test exactly what it does. Locally, one would argue that people heading for the south of Cambridge, as I said earlier, to the biocampus and places like that, are going to use the train rather than using the busway. But it's much more significant than that, and the impact of a major scheme like this it would be hugely positive. It should have been taken into account. I'm just reading the guidance at 2.2.12, which says that the evaluation results often suggest that benefits can be extremely sensitive to local sources of uncertainty. This is a huge local source of uncertainty, and it stretches way out to Bedford and is going to bring people in by a different route if they're choosing to travel into Cambridge.
Now, just if we then skip forward in the document, just for completeness, to page 18, where we have a section 5 defining additional alternative scenarios. And we see in the introduction, in addition to the high and low growth scenarios described in section 4, which is not dealing with, you see other scenarios may be required to test the impacts of significant sources of local uncertainty. These scenarios should also be subject to a full appraisal. And then we see here 5.1.2, appreciation of every possible permutation of source of uncertainty will require a very large number of model runs would take an unacceptable amount of time to run. Therefore, it is important that analysis of alternative scenarios is proportionate as well as sufficiently comprehensive. Now, just bearing in mind how long it would have taken, what would have been involved in running alternative scenarios to account for the potential effects of east-west rail by comparison with the effect, what is your judgment as to whether it would be proportionate to have done that in the circumstances?
It would have been easy if you have a model and you're going to run that model for a number of scenarios. It's dead easy to tack 2 on the end, which is the AM and PM impact of east-west rail, and that would have given you a good indication. And these things, if set up, I know you've got to program in the east-west rail route, which you should have done ultimately anyway. They're not time-consuming, and they're not expensive. They're simply not. And as I say, I would have just limited to a peak hour, AM and PM peak hours, to see what it does. And if it doesn't abstract anything from any route or anything, then I'll say, fair enough, I've done the test, I've ticked the box, and we can all nod and say that's fine. But if it then suggests that 10% of your revenue is going to disappear, or even more, then it should have been examined far more in detail and properly, so we understand today what that impact is going to be in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Those are all the questions I had for you.
Thanks, Mr. Johnston. Mr. Parker, we'll take the break now. So 10-minute break. Back, please, at 4:05. Right, it's time to resume the inquiry for the last part of the day. And Mr. Parker, it's your next witness, who is Mr. Lee.
I'm grateful. Good afternoon, Mr. Lee. Now, you have given a proof of evidence and a rebuttal proof of evidence in this matter, and if I can just introduce you by reference to your proof of evidence, at section 2, you explain that you are a senior transport policy officer at North Hertfordshire District Council with responsibility for assessing and helping shape planning applications for large developments, developing transport policies and strategies, and managing transport projects. You completed a Master's in Transport Economics at Leeds Institute for Transport Studies in 2018-2019, and your dissertation was a detailed examination and reconstruction of the CSRM2 Saturn strategic model of the Greater Cambridge region. You then explain at 2.3 that you co-founded a local voluntary organisation, Smarter Cambridge Transport, with which you were involved until 2021, when the organisation retired. You say at 2.5 you've engaged closely with this project for over 10 years in various ways. I just want to start by asking you, when did you first have any, as it were, involvement with this project?
Mr. Parker, just before you do, just one thing I'd like clarification on. Mr. Lee, I don't normally intervene on experience and qualifications, but I just wondered what the relevance in paragraph 2.1 was of your role at North Hertfordshire District Council, because as far as we're aware, they're not involved in the inquiry.
That's correct, sir. It is simply a statement of my current employment. It's not indicating any relevance to the inquiry.
Normally when people give a position, it's because the organisation they're representing or their role as a consultant has some relevance. And you'll be aware that at the end of our report there'll be an appearances list which will give individuals standing in relation to the proposal. Now, should we really be saying that you're representing North Hertfordshire District Council?
No, sir.
That doesn't seem appropriate.
It wouldn't be appropriate. Unlike most people who appear at public inquiries, I'm not appearing in my professional capacity.
Yes, that's what I thought.
But I am a professional transport. I'm a transport professional, sorry.
So to put something along those lines in, that would seem to be more sensible.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
I think I'm rather to blame for that inclusion. It was done at my suggestion with a view to being as transparent as possible with the inquiry as to what Mr. Lee's day job was. But as he said, there's no sense in which that role has any bearing on the evidence that he's giving.
Yes, that's what we thought.
Yeah. So, Mr. Lee, then, I was asking you about your involvement with this specific project. Where did it begin?
It began in 2015. So this project was one of the very first ones that the then City Deal, then Greater Cambridge Partnership, was developing and consulting on, and my organisation and me personally engaged with every consultation from the very beginning, and appeared and proposed questions to the Executive Board and to the Joint Assembly on this scheme from the very beginning, so from 2015.
And just to be clear, at that stage, did you have any involvement with either CPPF or Cambourne Parish Council?
Not directly. I did represent Smarter Cambridge Transport on the local liaison forum, and therefore was sitting alongside Cambourne Parish Council and CPPF, but I was not working for or directly with them, except collaborative, in a generally collaborative way.
And when did you become involved with CPPF and CPC?
That began in 2021. I had completed my Master's and decided to end to retire Smarter Cambridge Transport, Cambridge PPF approached me to ask them if I would write a report setting out an alternative option for the Cambourne-Cambridge corridor to submit to the independent auditor, who was at that time inviting additional evidence from third parties.
And that is the document which we have in the core documents at CD 931, I think it is. I may have got that numbering wrong. Yes. No, that's the wrong document, sorry.
Do we need to go there?
No, we don't need to go there. But we know we're
we've got the
talking.
documents. Let's just carry on.
I'm grateful. So that was the first, as it were, document that you produced on behalf of CPPF and CPC.
That is correct.
I'm grateful. Now, and then have you been thereafter involved with what CPPF and CPC have been doing as regards the scheme since that time, since 2021?
So there was effectively a hiatus while we awaited the independent audit. Concluded from that. I was not kind of formally working. No, sorry, that's not true. I was engaged for a while to work for Cambridge PPF on a temporary basis, not specifically to do with this, but to actually assist with their planning committee work, their planning review work. Then I got a job professionally with North Herts Council. It was only in 2023 that I came back to work specifically on this report, and I did a number of further iterations to review updated data, to analyse updated data, and to make changes to the design of the proposed design.
And in terms of the reports that you've done, we've seen Mr. Cameron's took Mr. Johnston to references in which CPPF have made representations, or CPC have made representations to various bodies, including the applicant, in relation to the scheme. Were you responsible for making those representations, or what was your involvement, if any, with those?
No, I had no involvement in either CPPF's or Cambourne Parish Council's representations to those earlier consultations. I wrote consultations for Smarter Cambridge Transport alone.
Thank you. Now, in your proof of evidence at section 3 onwards, you explain the background to the CPPF alternative. There have been a number of questions to Mr. Johnston about the alternative and the right approach to the alternative. Can you just explain to the inspectors what you see is the function and purpose of providing the CPPF alternative and how it should be viewed by the inspectors?
Indeed. So our aim was to push the Greater Cambridge Partnership to properly evaluate an in-highway scheme, and there was frustration that the schemes that had been developed by GCP's consultants took they didn't take our suggestions. They rebriefed the consultants to do something completely different. So one of the schemes that was developed was a two-way bus lane. Well, actually, a two-way guided bus lane alongside Madingley Road, between the Madingley Road roundabout and the M11. And we had never suggested that was what we thought was appropriate or would fit in that corridor. And one of the reasons why the scheme, my report evolved over time was essentially GCP's response, well, that's not feasible. And we were coming back was saying, But what happens if you made further adjustments to the design? What difference would that make? And what we were hoping and expecting GCP to do was to design an in-highway scheme as if that was going to be what they were going to build, and then evaluate it alongside the CPPF against their preferred option. So there was a fair comparison between the two. Whereas in fact the response was always that what you're suggesting is not viable, even though the parameters with which they were working did not seem reasonable or did not accept any departures from standards, to revert to Mr. Johnson's proof.
Now, at section 5 of your proof, jumping forward in it, you have a section entitled Illustration of CPPF Alternative, and your report then sits as an appendix to your proof of evidence. But I just want to touch on what you say at paragraphs 5.4, 5.5 and 5.6 of your proof of evidence, by reference, for example, at the point that was put by Mr. Cameron to Mr. Johnston, that if, for example, local highway authority approval for the scheme shown in the Appendix F drawings was not forthcoming, that would essentially reflect the guillotining of the CPPF alternative. What is your position as to the approach that the inspectors should take to what PPF is proposing in that respect?
So the design that we commissioned from Civilistics was essentially in resignation of the fact that the GCP was not going to provide, was not going to produce a scheme that we thought started with parameters that were realistic. It was not ever proposed as a to-be-built scheme, and it started with a very limited topographical survey that was provided by the applicant, but it did not start with a full up-to-date resurvey or a complete topographical survey of the route that was up to date. It was only ever meant to be illustrative, to essentially demonstrate that it was possible to fit a road and a bus lane and an actual travel route within the public highway, and avoiding severe harm to the ecology along the route and to the setting of the American cemetery. But it was always expected that it would need further iterative refinement to get to a scheme that could be built, and that might involve some concessions on the ecological impact and on the harms, and it might involve some departures from highway standards in the design, but we were not proposing it to be built as shown.
Thank you. And then I want to move back then in your proof of evidence away from the CPPF alternative to cover some of the other points that you make. So in section 4 of your proof of evidence, you deal first, it's paragraph 4.1, section 4.1, with deficient modelling, and you deal specifically with an analysis of bus journey times, and you pick out some points at 4.1.2, and I just want to deal with one point that's taken against you in respect of that data, because Mr. Baker, we don't need to take it up, but for your references, at paragraph 4.1.10 of his rebuttal proof, he calls into question the value of the data that your bus journey time analysis is based on, by reference to upgrade works that were going on the A428. Yeah. Turn up his rebuttal if you need to, but I think that's the central point he makes. Can you just comment on your response to that, please?
So the analysis I did was based on weekday, daytime bus movements along Madingley, between Cambourne and Cambridge. The works on the A428, which are ongoing and were going on in 2024, has involved intermittent interruptions to the traffic, to overnight closures and some weekend closures. The impact of those would have been negligible on daytime traffic that I was analysing. So I believe that 2024 was a robust year to be analysing to compare with 2019. And I would also point out that any calibration or validation of the CSRM2 model between 2016 and 2020 would have suffered from the diversion of traffic because of the A14 roadworks, which were far more severe in their impact than the current A428 works.
Thank you. And you say you give some data at 4.1.2 of your proof, and we can see what you've written there. That speaks to itself. I just want to quickly look at your figures. So if I can ask you please turn to page 66 of your proof of evidence, which is actually within your report. So it's page 34. The inspectors I note are working from paper, so it's page 34 of 61 of the appendix, but it's page 66 of the PDF. And we have some figures here. Can you just briefly talk the inspectors through what we can see on these figures and why you say they're important in terms of an analysis of bus journey times?
Yes, so nearly every bus that travels along the route along Madingley Road carries a GPS tracker. That GPS tracker is sending data back to a data hub that is actually set up by GCP, the Greater Cambridge Partnership, and it allows us to reconstruct real-time movements of pretty much every bus that moves in that corridor. So I've taken all of that data and I've analysed it, and I've analysed it in a way that you won't normally see outside of an academic paper, to try and give the fullest possible picture of what traffic looks like on that road. So it shows 4 lines. One is the median, so in other words 50% of the traffic travels in that time or quicker. The next one is the 80th percentile, and that means approximately, given this is weekday traffic, that you would see that level, that journey time would be that about once a month, and then once a week, and then the 95th percentile is approximately once a month. So basically what we're getting is to try and get a fuller picture of what traffic looks like in the corridor. And so figure 1 is looking at, it's segmented, and so this is looking at Cambourne to the Madingley Mulch roundabout, which is not, it's not relevant to the CPVF alternative, but you can see that there is a relatively wide range in journey times, both in 2019 and 2024, and actually the biggest reason for that variation in journey time is the dwell time for buses to pick up and set down passengers. That's the reality of operating buses, that it can take about 5 minutes to load a bus. If we look at figure 2 on that page, this is the journey time from Madingley Mulch to the M11 exit. So this is the critical bit that's relevant to the CPPF alternative and to that part of the applicant's scheme, which is the busway through Coton and the Coton Orchard. And you'll see that in 2019 there was a very marked peak in extended journey times in the morning. You'd see that the median, so 50% of the traffic was going through quickly, but about once a week there was a significant delay, and once a month there was a very severe delay. So, but that compares with 2024, where there is not that range in journey times. It is substantially reduced. The other graphs there are showing further sections of the route, so along to the Eddington Avenue junction over the M11 bridge. Not a lot of variation in journey time in either 2019 or 2024. I'm just going to skip forward, just for the sake of time, to the outbound journey times. So this is on page 36, section 13.1.2. This is the first graph is showing you the journey time from Cambridge city centre to Grange Road. And you can see there is a huge variation in journey times in 2019 and still a fairly significant range in 2024. And that's to get you to the point, to Grange Road is the eastern end of the applicant scheme. Further along Madingley Road, there is not a very significant variation in journey time. There is a small increase in the evening peak. And this will be partly to do with set down and pick up of passengers, and it will be partly to do with traffic lights. And then the M11 exit, again, we see variation in 2019 and virtually no variation in 2024. And then the last one of those graphs on the next page, this is outbound from the M11 exit to the Madingley Mulch roundabout. And here there is very little variation in 2019 and almost no variation in 2024. So in terms of the relevance to both the applicant scheme, the problem that the applicant is trying to solve existed in 2019 and is most clearly seen in figure 2 and on the under 13.1.1, where there was a very large peak in congestion in the morning coming into Cambridge, and that was primarily what the scheme was meant to solve. An inbound bus lane would overcome that in the same, effectively the same, to the same extent, but nevertheless the problem is smaller now than it was. Clearly, with further development, there is every expectation that it will increase again. But an inbound bus lane would be a proportionate response to that particular problem. And as the data shows, there is no problem outbound from the M11 to the Madingley Mulch roundabout, and therefore there is no case for building an outbound bus way or bus lane.
Thank you. And just pausing on the graphs on page 66, figure 2, and you can see the very obvious peak for the section of road that we're concerned about. We obviously see in many of the application materials reference to journey time savings for buses travelling during the AM peak, and we know that those journey time savings have been calculated using the F-series model, that's not in dispute, during a period during or prior to 2019. So when one sees journey time savings that are being claimed and forecast for the bus for the busway, how do they relate to the variation and the delays that we see in the peak on the graph on the left-hand side? So
if we recall, the adjustment that the applicant made to the model was to reduce traffic by 10%. What this is showing is that 10% may not be the level of change in traffic. We actually don't know what the level of change in traffic is, because we haven't got a count of the traffic. Although I do show on figure 9. There is a manual. There were manual traffic counts conducted in 2018 and 2022, which do show the traffic on Madingley Hill, and you can compare the traffic in 2018 and 2022. So you've got. Sorry, my computer's gone peculiar. I think the blue line. Sorry, could you just read the key on that, because I'm going to have to reset this.
The key is peculiar.
Oh, is it peculiar on what's uploaded? Right. Okay. Then I'll have to go back to my.
Yeah. I think what we've got in the printed copies, I don't know if it's the same on those looking at a screen, but there are no words or figures. It's just symbols.
Which page are you on?
So it's page 37.
37 of the report.
There is a graph on that page, and for some reason the key has got corrupted.
Yeah.
We'll have to have a look at that. Is that, in the absence of, is there anything else you want to say? I just want to come back to the figures on, if it's a figure 2 on page 66.
Yes.
Are you there? So we can see the morning peak. So at around 8:30, we can see that 50% of the buses are taking between, say, 16 minutes to make that journey. Yeah. 20% of the buses are taking over 25 minutes to make that journey, and 5% of the buses are taking 35 minutes to make that equivalent journey. And we know that when the applicant has claimed bus journey time savings, those savings are calculated by reference to this time period or a period before that, yeah? And we've obviously seen some quite significant journey time savings that have been claimed by the applicant for their busway by comparison with this baseline position. How does your analysis as to whether there is the same delay in the AM peak in 2024 as shown on your graph, how does that affect the journey time savings, the significance of those journey time savings that are being claimed by the applicant for this scheme?
Because the scheme is not addressing the variation journey time within the city centre, Madingley Hill is the most significant part of the journey that the scheme is intending to reduce delays on, and the delay that is being reduced has itself reduced through just the passage of time. So in 2024, had the model been rebased in a year post-COVID, it would have shown significantly less journey time savings on this section of the route, and therefore on the total journey time from Cambourne.
Thank you. And obviously, a central complaint made by Mr. Johnson and yourself is that we haven't produced, that the applicant hasn't produced post-COVID evidence. And Mr. Cambourne put the point a number of times to Mr. Johnson, well, you haven't produced any post-COVID sensitivity testing, have you, Mr. Johnson? Well, what do you say? Is this evidence of post-COVID local conditions of travel journey times which is relevant to the likely benefits of the busway?
Yeah, absolutely it is, and it was, I produced it specifically to show the impact post-COVID compared to 2019. So yes, this is detailed analysis of post-COVID travel patterns in this corridor that this scheme is providing a transport connection in.
Thank you. Then, moving on, 4.4.4 of your proof of evidence. You deal with likely bus patronage, and you refer to the forecast daily patronage of 10,300 passenger trips, and we know from Mr. Whitehouse's evidence that that excludes trips generated by the additional dwellings at Cambourne West and Bourne Airfield, which is said to be dependent on the scheme. So that is 10,300 additional trips, excluding those additional homes, and you take issue with that claim in your proof of evidence. I mean, you've heard what Mr. Whitehouse said in his evidence, did anything that he say in his oral evidence provide you any greater clarity as to how the applicant is forecasting that there will be 10,300 additional passenger trips?
No. All we learned was that it was an output from the model, and as I understand it, it's an output from the Series E version of the CSRM model and not from the Series F, which was used for the transport assessment and the highways impacts. But perhaps more concerningly is that we don't have a breakdown of the origins and destinations for those bus trips. So we don't know what proportion of those bus trips are to West Cambridge, which is where the busway goes to, and what proportion are to the biomedical campus, the city centre, the Cambridge Science Park, and so on. And this is relevant in general to understand the plausibility of the attractiveness of a busway to West Cambridge for people who are travelling to other destinations. But it is particularly relevant in the case of understanding the potential for abstraction to East-West Rail, which will provide much faster and more reliable journey times to the biomedical campus and to the CB1. So at the moment we simply have this rather bald figure of 10,300 as the 12-hour count for the number of trips on the busway on a weekday, with no real clear understanding about what assumptions were made that in the model that yielded that output.
Thank you. I think that deals with everything on transport modelling, unless there's anything else that you want to add to what you've already said before we move on to the economic analysis and the land value uplift.
It's worth saying that in my proof, my rebuttal, I did attempt to test the plausibility of that 10,300 figure in terms of the number of trips that it implies, the mode share that it perhaps implies. Something that I have only recently become aware of is that in the environmental statement, it states that the scheme will use single-decker buses.
So if you're referring to a document, do you have a document reference for that?
So that's CD 110.01, paragraph 3.3.3.
Okay.
So CD 110.01, paragraph 3.3.3. So this states that the scheme will run 12-metre single-decker buses. And I hadn't appreciated that before, but it is not any great surprise that a single-decker bus has a lower capacity than a double-decker bus. Most of the buses that currently run on this route, the City 4 and some of the X3 buses, are double-decker. A single-decker has a seated capacity of about 40. Now the economic case, so that's CD 120.02, assumes a capacity of 95 people per bus, and that simply is not possible on a single-decker bus. It wouldn't be legally permitted to carry that number. And if you multiply up the number of buses a day, so my understanding from the environmental statement is that there will be 10 buses per hour. There seems to have been some perhaps changes or confusion about the number of buses. That's the most recent statement I could find from the applicant in terms of the number of buses. So 10 buses an hour over 12 hours, carrying about a seated capacity of 40, gives you a capacity of 9,600 in both directions over a 12-hour period. 9,600. So to carry 10,300 people implies that every bus running from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. will be full with standing room only all hours of the day. And that just doesn't pass a basic realism check. But I set out in my proof other ways in which to look at that figure, and frankly, without more information or breakdown from the applicant, it simply does not look plausible.
Thank you. So moving on then to the economic analysis, and particularly your points about land value uplift. You have dealt with this in your proof of evidence at 4.8 onwards, and you also deal with it in your rebuttal, and we can see in general terms from your proof of evidence that you make various assumptions and perform various calculations, and I think in various respects Mr. Whitehouse, to be fair to him, had taken issue with some of your assumptions, some of your calculations, and I asked him some questions about that. Can you just explain then what happened after, I mean, the inspectors know to some degree, but what happened after Mr. Whitehouse has given evidence, and what led to the production of the document, which I believe now has a CD number, and so I understand that you're content to look at this document, albeit on the premise that we're going to edit some of the appendices afterwards, but I think we need to talk through the first few pages of it.
It's the documents themselves rather than the appendices.
Indeed, yeah. So, Ms. Lee, can you explain, so we have it in evidence, how this document came to be produced?
Yes. So the land value uplift, the calculation of the land value uplift requires knowledge of various inputs, not all of which were provided in the economic assessment or the economic case addendum. So I had to make educated guesses for some of those. And I freely admit that I made some errors in my initial calculations, and Mr. Whitehouse rightly took issue with those. So I took the view that the only sensible way of proceeding was to ask Mr. Whitehouse's team to review my own calculations. So I redid them, and I sent the spreadsheet with the reconstruction of the land value uplift as calculated in the economic assessment, economic case addendum, and the various scenarios that I also tested of varying the initial house price, house growth, and sorry, there's one other parameter there. But the note that we have received is a recalculation using not my reconstruction, but the model that the applicant has access to, and it confirmed that my calculations were within a reasonable degree accurate, and I'm very happy to accept the BCRs that were calculated in that report as being the true values.
So let's.
I didn't catch what you ended up saying there.
So
You were happy to confirm that.
So I'm happy to accept that the calculated values in that note are the true values.
Right.
So I'm not contesting that. No, I'm not. No.
That's helpful. There's obviously, to be fair to Mr. Whitehouse, who isn't here, differences in professional judgment as to what assumptions should be used, and he has, in an attempt to be accommodating, used the basis of your assumptions in order to enable you to illustrate your assumptions on an agreed mathematical basis. That's essentially the function of the note, isn't it?
It is. He is not accepting that my assumptions are correct, but he is simply provided, if you make that assumption, then this is the consequence on the VCR.
Okay, so I just want to spend some time, last bit of your evidence, and going through the note, which I think is CD 2950 for those who want to follow online, but we will have the document available. It's a WSP document dated 9th of October 2025. 60, I'm grateful. Thank you. And I'm going to hand over to you, essentially, Mr. Lee. What I want you to do in respect of each of the scenarios that are presented is to explain what the assumption is underlying the scenario and why you say that's an appropriate assumption to make, bearing in mind, of course, that Mr. Whitehouse doesn't necessarily agree with it, and then to explain what the significance of using that assumption is in economic terms. I'm going to leave you to do that in the way that you feel best, but I think that's what we need to understand from this note.
Yes, understood. So we start with a BCR of 1.8 when we take the adjusted BCR for the transport, the tag analysis of the transport scheme, and then we add in the indicative benefits from the land value uplift. So that's our starting point. Through cross-examination of Mr. Whitehouse, I don't believe that we found a plausible justification for treating the 850 homes in Cambourne West as being dependent on this scheme. And therefore the first test was to consider if only the 3,000 homes at Bourne Airfield are treated as dependent, what difference does that make to the BCR? And that reduces it to 1.5, and that was my calculation, and that was confirmed by Mr. Whitehouse's team.
Sorry to interrupt you. Where do we see that if the inspectors want to understand where that is in the document? Just, it may be obvious, but just to make sure.
So sorry. On page 3, we have a table with white text in black headings, and the first column is Bourne Airfield only. So the estimate is my estimate based on a kind of a blind reconstruction of the land value uplift calculation, and the calculated BCR is Mr. Whitehouse's team, the WSP's recalculation of it using the actual model they were using. So
I mean, given your previous answer, I don't think we need to worry about the estimated BCR. We can just proceed on the basis of the calculated BCR, yeah?
Yes. So the second column is house prices adjusted down. So in this, for this, where the applicant took a 2024 house price of £506,000 thereabouts, I looked to see what the land registry average house price in South Cambridgeshire was, and I also looked on Rightmove to see what the average house price in both Cambourne and Highfields Caldercote had been recently, and those were both substantially lower, about 17% lower than the figure used by the applicant in calculating land value uplift. Now, although I was in a sense kind of ridiculed for taking Rightmove as a point of reference, I was actually taking 2 points of reference, one which is the land registry, which is definitive, and Rightmove was simply a sort of second point of reference, and both of them were similar, and so I used the higher figure, which was actually from the land registry average for South Cambridgeshire, so I used that figure instead. And if you apply that alone, so you still keep Cambourne West and Bourne Airfield as being treated as dependent, but you just reduce that starting price in 2024 price for housing, that reduces the BCR from 1.8 to 1.3. Can I just
pause there just so we can deal with everything?
Yeah, can I just check exactly where you are in this table on page 3?
So this is the second column of the first row. So we can ignore the estimated BCR column completely, row completely, and we can ignore the difference row completely. So we're just going to look at the calculated BCR metric, which is the figures provided by the applicant, and I'm accepting those as being true. So we're looking at the columns, the heading of the columns, and the middle row.
Middle row.
Yes.
Right.
And again, just for the avoidance of doubt, when you referred to the 1.8, that's the applicant's figure, but that's not shown on this.
No, that's the starting point for the land value uplift for testing variations in the land value uplift. So if we take the applicant's assumptions, then the VCR would be 1.8, and then if we vary the assumptions, then we get different VCRs, and those are what I'm talking through now.
For your notes, so that's referred to at paragraph 6 on page 2, the 1.8 indicative VCR metric as a starting point. Just before we move on, you've explained why, in your proof of evidence, why you say you've taken the land registry data. Now, I just want a brief comment. The applicant has used a viability report, which I think is appended to this document, and it was put by Mr. Cambourne in re-examination to Mr. Whitehouse that surely, bespoke viability assessment of house prices is better than land registry values. What comment do you have on the methodology that was used to calculate the £506,000 as the value?
So the report that's appended was, as I understand, was produced for the local plan in 2021, and the applicant used a GDP inflator to convert that price in 2021 to a price in 2024. That is a measure you would take if you didn't have access to actual data. So you do that if you were doing a forecast or you were going back in time to a point where you didn't have data. But where you have actual data, then you would go to the data. Now, I don't dispute the fact that the land value the assessment of land value in that report is different to house prices, but nevertheless the product that we're trying to end up at is a house price, because that's what the land value uplift is based on, because you're looking at the difference in the agricultural land value and the value once you've built a house on it that you can sell. So to my mind, the correct, with access to actual data, you should use actual data rather than adjusting historic data.
Thank you. Next scenario.
So the third scenario is lower house price growth. Now, the applicant claims that in the last 10 years to 2024, real term growth in house prices in South Cambridgeshire has been 2.2% per annum. In real terms, that means after adjusting for inflation. So it's, in other words, if money were worth what it is today, how much would a house have cost in the 10 years ago? Now, I've done detailed analysis again from the land registry to look at house prices in South Cambridgeshire and how they have varied over time in nominal value. So in other words, the actual price at which houses were sold in the value of money at that time, and then adjusted to be in the value of money at a particular point in time. And that clearly shows that that house prices have been falling. And if I can just find the table, the graph that I provided, which I think was in my rebuttal, was it? Sorry, it must have been in my proof, sorry. So there's a table for the graph showing land values. So in my proof on page 26, so figure 1, you'll see an analysis, and there are 3 lines on there. The dark solid lines are moving averages to kind of smooth out the peaks and troughs that you'll see normally by through seasons, and just the normal variation. And the middle one of those lines, the green one, is the 12-month moving average for South Cambridgeshire house prices adjusted for inflation. The CPIH is a measure of inflation, and it is the most relevant adjustment to the value of money. So it's not the same thing as GDP inflators, which are to do with economic analysis. This is about adjusting to the value of today's money for house prices in the past. And you can see that house prices peaked in around 2018 and have been falling since then. And therefore there is no plausible way that you can claim that house prices, the applicant can claim that house prices have been rising by 2.2% per annum over the past decade. I've taken 2014 to 2024, and the annualized increase in house prices over that period is 0.9%. If you do use the GDP inflator, which was what Mr. Whitehouse claimed was the more appropriate one, then it is 0.85%. Is the annualized increase in house prices over that 10 years. But this is against a backdrop of actually a trend of declining house prices. But nevertheless, the scenario I've tested is a 0.85% annualized growth in house prices. And that also reduces the VCR to let's get back to that document. That also reduces the BCR to 1.3.
So that's the third column across, and that's considered in isolation.
Yes, considering just that, yes.
Just two questions on the assumption that you've made, or the analysis. I shouldn't say assumption because it's based on evidence. Firstly, where does the 2.2 come from that the applicant used? Is there any evidential basis for that?
I think it claims that it comes from the Aspinall report that's appended to this note, but actually I haven't been able to find it. So maybe the applicant can help the inspectors by pointing them to it, because I haven't been able to.
And if we just look at paragraphs 6 and 7 on page 2, we can see reference to, in the second sentence of 6, an assumption of nil growth in house price growth is at the low end of the reasonable range, according to the MHCLG appraisal guide. So, what? And then, if for completeness, let's look at paragraph 7 as well. Assumption of 0% real increases is a low sensitivity test alongside a high sensitivity test of a 5% increase in house prices. So your evidence-based assessment that there is, as it were, a 0% increase in house price growth, how does that compare to the recommendations in the MHCLG appraisal guide?
Well, it recommends testing a range, or testing figures within a range that from 0% to 5%, and that would presumably be informed by local markets, and what would be deemed to be appropriate in the local market. And I think in the current housing market, the 0% to the lower end of that range is a reasonable scenario to test.
Thank you. But then if we then look at the final column on the second row, we see 5% house price growth. Is that to accommodate the 5% high-end sensitivity test?
Yes, but a sensitivity test should be informed by some degree of realism. In other words, you sensitivity test things that might transpire. There is no evidence currently that house prices are going to grow by 5% per annum over the next over the period of the appraisal period, which is it's 60 years for the transport appraisal. I can't remember what the appraisal period is for the land value uplift, but I see no evidence to say that to see that that would be a realistic scenario to test, even though it's permitted within the guidance.
Thank you. And then just for completeness, I think the headings give the game away, but if you can just talk through the other columns in your table on page 3.
Yes, so the other columns are essentially looking at different permutations of assumptions. So depending on what assumptions, so as you believe are justified and you are persuaded by the applicant are reasonable, then you can kind of pick a permutation that makes sense to you. In my view, I think it is reasonable to exclude Cambourne West because I don't think the applicant has demonstrated dependence, and I think it's reasonable to use a lower house price because that's what the land registry data indicates is true, and I think it's also reasonable to take a nil future growth as a plausible sort of central scenario, given that there is a current trend of decreasing house prices. So the third column of the second part of the table, Bourne Airfield only with house prices adjusted and nil future growth, that yields a BCR of 0.5, and that is equal to the adjusted BCR for the transport scheme. So in effect, that's saying that with those assumptions, the land value uplift adds no social benefit to the business case and leaves the BCR at what it is with a conventional tag analysis of the transport benefits.
Thank you. Now is there anything else you want to say about land value uplift?
So in deciding whether to include land value uplift in an assessment of a transport scheme, it is necessary to demonstrate that there is true dependency. Now, as I've said, I don't believe the applicant has provided any evidence that Cambourne West is dependent on this scheme. And the evidence that Bourne Airfield is dependent is based on a planning condition, condition 13, which states that no more than 500 homes may be built before the busway scheme or an equivalent scheme is delivered. Now, if it weren't for that, one would be asking the question, how plausible is it that development built next to the strategic road network, with direct access to the strategic road network, which provides a dual carriageway access to the east, directly into North Cambridge, and from 2027 west to the A1 via Bedford. It seemed to me professionally, I think it is highly implausible that you could demonstrate that that development is dependent on a new piece of transport infrastructure when it already has pretty exceptionally good high capacity transport links already. There is of course the St Neots Road adjacent to the A428, so in effect you have 3 lanes of capacity going east and west from there. And also tag unit A2.2, which is core document 950, actually sets out some tests in Appendix A for determining whether a development is in fact dependent.
No, I know it's 5 + 5, but this is not a document the inspectors have seen before. I do want you to us to just take up the document to have a look at what it says. So it's CD 950. Transport Analysis Guidance, Unit A2.2. And We're referring to Appendix A, I think. Do you have a page reference for your reference?
So yes, PDF page 38, which is also page 38 in the printed document.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, just put...
Just one moment.
Appendix A.
So yes, Appendix A, page 38.
Yeah.
And in particular, paragraph A.2.1, it states the purpose of dependency testing is to determine at what point proposed site-specific developments will reach a reasonable level of service on the transport network. Now that would normally be evidenced through a transport assessment. The transport assessment for the Bourne Airfield development was produced pre-COVID, and even then it did not identify a point at which the highway network would not perform at a reasonable level, and therefore did not identify a threshold of 500 homes or any other threshold at which the performance of the network would require a transport intervention. And that appendix actually sets out some quite rigorous requirements for demonstrating dependency, including constructing scenarios with and without the development and with and without the transport scheme, some of which have been assessed through the transport assessment for the Cambourne Cambridge scheme, the C2C scheme that the applicant's applying for the order for, but not all of them. And in particular, what it hasn't done is used a scenario to test the point at which the number of homes at Bourne Airfield causes the degradation in the performance of the highway network. And without that, in transport terms rather than in planning terms, the applicant has not demonstrated dependency. And as I think was mentioned when Mr. Whitehouse is being cross-examined, a planning and also when the Mayor was speaking, a planning condition can always be varied by application, an agreement, and therefore that risk that the claimed dependency turns out not to be supported by the planning permission for Bourne Airfield, that should have been identified as a risk and should have been appropriately modelled with scenario testing. And as far as I understand from the documents I've seen, the applicant has not done that. It has not demonstrated dependency in the way recommended by the guidance.
Thank you. And to be clear, obviously you have we've looked at the note that was produced. One of a scenario that hasn't been modelled is a scenario that doesn't involve development at Bourne Airfield. But obviously, if you're right about dependency at Bourne Airfield, a further downward adjustment to the BCR would need to be made. Is that right?
Well, the modelling to demonstrate dependency is completely unconnected to the BCR, which is to do with the benefits for the scheme. But if there is no dependency, then clearly the land value uplift falls away completely, and therefore the BCR reverts to 0.5. That said, the applicant could, and I believe should, have modelled a scenario, should have appraised a scenario where Cambourne West and Bourne Airfield was completely built out and the transport benefits of the new dwellings were counted towards the benefits for the scheme. So in other words, a more conventional cost-benefit analysis that takes all of the development that is going to use the scheme and appraise that and generate a BCR for that. And that BCR almost certainly would have been higher than 0.5. but we don't know what it would have been.
And in that situation, I'm leading you just because of the time, that they would be transport-related benefits as opposed to land value uplift benefits.
That's correct. But just to be clear, transport benefits, although journey time savings are generally the largest component of that, there are in the adjusted BCR, there are what are called wider economic impacts, which include things like agglomeration, which is effectively the greater efficiency of the local economy, which are not directly captured in journey time savings. So a conventional cost-benefit analysis, so a conventional tag-based appraisal of a transport scheme, captures transport benefits and some wider economic impacts that are associated with the transport intervention. But that should have been tested, because that if it turns out that the claim dependency of development is not supported by evidence, then there is nothing for them to fall back on other than the 0.5 BCR, which relates to the transport benefits of the scheme excluding the claim dependent development. So we don't have a BCR that includes the claim dependent development.
Mr. Lee, thank you very much. Those are all the questions I had for you, Examination Chief. Thank you to everyone for going slightly beyond 5 o'clock to facilitate that.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Mr. Lee. Before we adjourn, can I just check whether there's anything anybody needs to raise? Mr. Cameron?
No, sir.
Just, I know it's very late. Timetabling tomorrow, as
Yes.
matters stand, we only have Mr. Lee and Ms. Hurst. Mr. Woodfield is timetabled to come, what day will be Thursday, but it seems to me realistic that subject to Mr. Cameron's cross-examination of Mr. Lee, we may get on to Mr. Woodfield tomorrow afternoon. I don't know whether he's available, but I'm just querying whether I should explore asking him to come tomorrow afternoon with a view to moving through the timetable. But it's just something I'd need to do now.
Yes, of course. I think a lot depends on cross-examination. Cameron, you're down for another lengthy spell.
Yes, and it all depends on how long the answers are.
Yes.
But the other issue we have is that our opposite number witness is not going to be available tomorrow. So we've managed without Mr. Whitehouse here today, because he's coming in a moment, but we'd be reluctant for Mr. Woodfield to be called before our experts are here to listen to what he has to say. And I think we may probably finish off cross-examination of Mr. Lee in the morning, but we've then got Professor Hurst, and we may get there, but
I think the answer to my question is probably no, but I just wanted to check.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mr. Parker. Anything else from anybody? Right. I think notwithstanding what's been said, I think it might be wise to keep the start time tomorrow at 9:30, just in case. So we'll adjourn now, resume at 9:30 in this room tomorrow morning. Thank you.